What we're going to be talking about are some of the stupid comments that people are making underneath this last video. And one of the very first things we need to look at is people that do not read, do not understand. We got this Jarl Bergine guy, and he's going, oh, the Van Allen probes communicate to the ground with S-band frequencies. So I guess contradicting yourselves, because according to you, that should not be possible. Well, this particular person doesn't know anything about the Van Allen probes, the way they were launched, haven't read any of the documentation, because the Van Allen probes use an elliptical orbit, and they have to be down under 400 miles before they can send the information back to the Earth. Once they're beyond that, the ionosphere itself causes enough scintillation and messes up their communications that they cannot communicate above 400 miles from the Earth. That is the Van Allen probes right there. And then, of course, you got Steve Palmer jumping in and backing him up on stuff like that. These people need to read before they make comments. And all they want is to be on here. They are the attention seekers. And then they're accusing us of being attention seekers. If they want to see attention seekers, especially like Marcus Allen, if he wanted to be attention seekers, he could get dressed up like Dame Edna and come on here. You know, that's an attention seeker, right? But we don't do that. We simply provide factual information from the documentation that NASA provides. We show the inconsistencies in the documentations out there. We provide those documents available for these people to read. And they get on here and they make the most ridiculous comments out there, and they get other people to support them in their ridiculous stuff. And none of them do any reading. They don't do any research. And there's another comment down here about, you know, reading the user's manual. Well, I think I'm probably the only person that have read the Apollo user's manual and the entire guidance systems for the LEM and all of that stuff. By the way, that one's well over 1,000 pages long, how to fly the LEM. Well, I think the everyday astronaut must have watched our video.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, that's the same guy that did the ones with the dogs swelling up and then coming back down after being in a vacuum.
Isn't the everyday astronaut, hasn't he been selected to go on some sort of mission? I haven't heard much about that recently. He was all excited because he was going to go to some place in NASA to do some training. But it's got very quiet about that. I don't know what's happened there, whether he was supposed to be on one of the missions or I don't know what it was. But he was very overexcited about it because he was going to go into space. It's about this time last year he was talking about it, that he'd been selected, but I can't remember what he'd been selected for. And there was a lot of training he was going to have to do to prepare himself for it.
About the same amount of training you'd need to do if you met Bill Shatner.
You're too cynical, Scott. You're too cynical, too honest, too cynical.
It's nice to support Canadian actors, but Bill's an exception.
Just to go back to what we were talking about, the people at NASA originally, Theodore von Karman, he was the guy, hence the Karman line. He was a big administrator around at the time. I think he came from Germany before the Second War, hence the name Theodore von Karman. Yeah, that's the one I was trying to think of. Interesting stories. I'll probably finish the book by next week, so I'll be able to get some more data on what happened to them all.
But isn't it something, same with Oberg, that they were all occult members?
They were. There's some very strange goings on there.
This is just my opinion, but perhaps those demonic entities that they were playing around with gave them some ideas. You know, I mean, who knows?
Well, they were doing all their activities on the OTO temple under the direction of Aleister Crowley, the most evil man in the world, he was dubbed. But he lived in Scotland, near Loch Ness. He wasn't in America. They wouldn't let him in. He had such a bad reputation that he couldn't get a visa. So he's doing it all by correspondence. Space Insider, SpaceX moon trip. When was that? Yeah, January last year. That's right. I like things that go fast. Oh dear. He's a real enthusiast.
That's almost as good as being a real astronaut.
Well, he's got to get there first, hasn't he?
I mean, if you're a real enthusiast for NASCAR, it doesn't mean you can get on the track and drive.
No, that's true. But you
And
could.
you think if you're going to the moon that you would want to have somebody that's absolutely has full knowledge of every piece of that equipment, how it operates, and is capable of dealing with every scenario. The amount of training that would have to go into that would be phenomenal. If
Yeah.
you are a host, you can go anywhere and do anything. So they should put him and Cox and Tyson and have the three of them go.
Oh,
Well, yeah, sure. They know everything about everything, so they could fix every problem that came up. Every problem that could ever arise with that craft, they would be able to fix it with nothing, just like MacGyver.
And document it at the same time. And create all the special effects needed to create the image that they need.
rather them than me.
You know what's interesting is SpaceX just did that launch yesterday. Now, they're claiming that they've got a brand new rocket engine that thing took off with. Now, I've never seen any testing on it. Why would you do all this testing on different engines that failed? You know, big poof of smoke and away they go and into pieces. And then they put a brand new engine out and put humans on board.
Well, they got to test it first. You can't just put humans on board.
Oh, they launched with it. Brand new engine. I watched the liftoff. It just looks like a solid fuel booster that's on there, like the flame that's coming out of that. But all of these other tests with their other engines and they're blowing up, of course, they didn't have people on board. Why would you now go to a brand new engine and actually put people on board when you're unwilling to, with other tests, put people on board? The rocket takes off, that's fine, but were there actually people on board? But if they're new and they haven't been tested, why would you put people on board?
Well, you wouldn't.
Well, they claim they're new. They're brand new design. And I've never seen any brand new design of these engines or different fuel or anything else, because when they changed to, using methanol, I mean, they're blowing the damn things up, right? You have that rapid disassembly of equipment going on. And yet they change them one more time and put people on board. It just doesn't make sense to me. I just thought it's absolutely absurd to take what they call as a brand new engine and put people on board the thing. I tried to look for the engine design that they claim's a new engine, nothing. Couldn't find the engine, the fuel, nothing for it.
Well, it's top secret. The Russians might get it.
Yeah, it probably is a Russian engine.
Yeah, well, yeah,
It
of course
worked.
it is. It's a Russian engine.
Yeah, it worked. It was a Russian engine.
Of course it's a Russian engine. It's the only ones that will work.
Yeah.
Oh dear. It's a bit sad, isn't it?
It is.
They keep wanting us to believe all these things, but I suppose if you have belief in Apollo, you'll believe anything that you're told, because you never question it. You just go along with it. That's what all cult members do. So you're all cult members. Oh dear. Look what happens to most cults. They just disappear, like Apollo's disappearing.
It will become like Jonestown, all right, when they finally admit that this was all just a political event.
There were 900 people died at that one, didn't they? Because Heaven's Gate, they killed themselves so they could wait for the UFO to come and collect them.
Yep.
And they believed it.
Yeah, they were going to get on the tail of the comet coming by, and they had to castrate themselves. They found them dead. All the guys were castrated, and they were all wearing a particular brand of sneaker or something.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. It's just stupid.
Just that's how influential, charismatic leaders can be. They can make you kill yourself.
Well, that's almost what happened. I mean, they tell the astronaut, get on top of that rocket. What does he do? Okay, boss. It doesn't matter if I blow up.
I've got an escape rod at the top. Trouble is, with solid fuel rockets, you can't do that. Oh dear. But you see, if you're a cult member, you believe everything you're told. You never question it, because if you question it, you're a heretic. You get chucked out, and your family gets chucked out. So you don't do that. That's how cults operate. And I should know. Been there, done that.
And you'd never want to go back to it.
No, it's a valuable lesson to learn. So that's why I can recognize cults and cult members and leaders and holy relics and the influence that is pressed. It's exactly what's happening with Apollo. It's become a cult.
Well, how you keep a cult alive is you take the children at a very young age, early school age, and you start implanting these ideas, these concepts in. You give them the imagination of space travel, and then you point out these heroes who have done it.
That's how you do it.
And they have no reason not to believe you, especially if you are considered an educator, you have a degree in something, or you are a person of authority. They just accept it from early childhood. And of course, to undo that and get an individual as they mature to look at things with an unbiased viewpoint, look at the possibilities of it and do it objectively is a completely different thing once they have been programmed. We were programmed the same way.
Well, Brian Cox is a Children of Apollo.
Yes, he has his own children's center called Children of Apollo, and his son is named Eagle and everything else.
God almighty.
So that's a cult. Those are cult members.
And not to mention the fact that his wife was, children's programming for British television?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, she works in British television. BBC, I think she works. See, right out in the open, you've got all these things going on which are so similar to cults we know about, cults which we've seen, that Apollo fits in perfectly, which is why nobody will come and debate us, because if they did, they would be considered to be falling down on their duty of maintaining the record of Apollo. They won't come and talk to us. Those who have fallen rather seriously short of any expectation. They thought they could persuade us otherwise. It's what cult members do. They try to persuade you to join their cult. They probably get commission for it, even get money for it.
That's why the British Interplanetary Society has functioned for such a long time. Imagination to reality. If we talk about it long enough, we consider it reality.
Yeah.
It's like if you write it down, if you put it in a book, if you write an article on a particular subject, once it's written down and printed and distributed, it becomes a fact. Well, our videos should become factual eventually.
They will be. They will be. They're a very good record now to show the dissolution, the reduction of influence of Apollo. Because we just carry on week after week, putting out information. More and more people are now looking at it, and many agree with us. Not everybody agrees with us, because there are still cult members out there who want to find out what we're doing and get upset and post rude messages. That's what cult members do. They don't take the scientific approach, they take the personal attack. It's the only thing they can do, because you've challenged their very existence by challenging what they believe and telling them that it's wrong. They've actually got it wrong. Sorry, guys. Look at it straightforwardly. That's how you get out of cults. You look realistically, scientifically, and unemotionally at what you've been told and try to confirm it or otherwise. If it's otherwise, you're out. You're a heretic. You can't stay in if you're a heretic. Oh, dear, oh, dear.
It is difficult for people to do because they're surrounded by other people have had the same programming.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And anybody that tries to talk to these people at a reasonable level and try to get them to be objective in what they're looking at, their friends and other people are going to drag them back and say, hey, these people are complete idiots. Like, we're uneducated. We're this, we're that. Well, I beg to differ. I look at it the other way around.
I agree with you, because if you put two pictures together and you're showing plasma around a craft and you're showing plasma in the Van Allen belts, and these people are coming along and they're saying, for example, well, we can't tell the difference. I don't understand what you're talking about. Well, can't you see? I mean, come on. You're supposed to be intelligent. Can't you guys see it? There's both are plasma. You could see the nice greenish hue of the aurora borealis. Yeah. Well, that's plasma, my friends. That's the same thing that's around that craft. So radio waves at that frequency of 2 gigahertz is not going to be able to push through that craft when that plasma field is around it. So how do you think that's going to make it all the way down to Earth through that plasma sheath in those Van Allen belts, especially when they're highly charged.
And it doesn't matter how many watts you're talking about. It disrupts the signal.
No, but you see, if you start asking questions like that, you'll then have to ask other questions, and you go on doing that, and you find that you were taught the wrong subjects. You were taught the wrong things. Therefore, you'll start to question more and more, and that can't be allowed. You can't be allowed to question things.
I think what people need to do is they really need to study our atmosphere, all of the effects that it has on keeping this planet temperate as you go farther out. And the first thing that will give you an indication that there's something happening is if you just even read a chart on temperature as you go up in elevation, and all of a sudden it gets hotter again. What's happening in that layer? You say, oh, well, there's hardly any air there. Well, you hit the ionosphere, you hit the thermosphere, right? It's called a thermosphere for a reason, because it gets hotter. It's because there's reactions happening in that area that is making that temperature rise. And the ionosphere, because it's so highly ionized in that area, and there's the first indication where you're going to have scintillation of communications in there with a highly ionized level. That's even before you get out to the Van Allen belts where you've got plasma.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got electromagnetic shielding protecting the Earth, and it's grabbing radiation and pulling it around the Earth. It's protecting the Earth in that fashion. And then when you see that it takes all forms of radiation and is protecting it except one tiny little bandwidth of radiation, which is white light and UV light, everything else is blocking. Like I even see a comment going, well, if there's so much plasma there, how come we can still see the stars? Well, it's because if you look at the thing, you realize that it's only white light able to come through there. Every other form of radiation at a lower wavelength or a higher wavelength is being blocked by the Van Allen belts. And if it didn't do that, we wouldn't exist. And then to even modify the UV light, you come down and we have an ozone layer that modifies that light even further to protect us further. And that must be by some fairly intelligent design, all of those different layers.
Here's a question. What creates ozone in the upper atmosphere?
It's hard to maintain. It's easy to manufacture, but it's hard to maintain it. It dissipates on its own. It breaks down on its own. At that particular elevation, it's fairly stabilized.
What's the chemical formula for ozone? It's O3. So it's 3 atoms of oxygen. What we breathe, what we call oxygen, is O2. And that's a fairly stable molecule. 50 miles up, where you've got UV light, UVB specifically, that can break oxygen atoms apart. It splits the O2 and it becomes O, just one O. But it's unstable. It wants to get together with another oxygen atom to make O2. So what you've got is ultraviolet B light, the wavelength of ultraviolet B splits the oxygen atom apart. They want to get back together. Some of them become O3, 3 atoms of oxygen. That's ozone. It's not very stable, and it can be destroyed quite easily by CFCs, we're told.
So that's only happening in the daytime when the sunlight's
Yes.
penetrating.
But here's the interesting part. Where do we find the holes in the ozone layer that we're being told is so destructive? They occur in 2 places only, above Antarctica and above the Arctic. What do those 2 places have in common with each other and nowhere else on the planet? A 6-month day and a 6-month night. 6-month night, there's no sunlight. No ozone is being created. It can't be. There's no ultraviolet B light to split the oxygen atoms apart. Therefore, there'll be a big hole. During the Antarctic summer, the hole closes. It's a natural process. There's nothing untoward about a hole in the ozone layer. It will become better during the 6 months of summer when the sunlight is there the whole time. And the reason it doesn't appear anywhere else on the planet is because there is no similar event on the planet of a 6-month day and a 6-month night. That's why ozone does protect us from certain wavelengths of light. And there are holes in the ozone layer, quite naturally, and they've been there ever since the world began. Nothing unusual about it. So why all the fuss about hole in the ozone layer? You go back to 1992, when we had what's called the Montreal Protocols and the conference of eliminating CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. Why was that happening? Why were these suddenly to be banned? CFCs, why were they to be banned? Oh, to stop the hole in the ozone layer. That was the answer. The real answer is because the original patent holder, Dow Chemical, the manufacturer of CFC, which is refrigeration gas, the original patent was taken out in November 1942, and it would run out in November 1992, 50 years later, when anybody could use the patent to make refrigeration gas, which is very much in demand with refrigeration trucks, lorries, planes, personal refrigerators. It was in huge demand. Dow Chemical didn't want to give up on the cash cow that they had because they could license the manufacture to other companies. In Britain, it was ICI, Imperial Chemical Industries. In Germany, it was Siemens. Right around the world, companies licensed the use of that patent to make refrigeration gas. So what they did was to outlaw the use of refrigeration gas to stop the hole in the ozone layer. That was the excuse. Dow Chemical had a wonderful idea. They got a new refrigeration gas called HCFC, hydrochlorofluorocarbon. And they introduced that as the replacement for CFC, chlorofluorocarbon.
Yeah, they call that R34. They went from R12 to R34.
That's right, yeah.
That's how they got the relicense on it and hold the patent on the new one for the next number of whatever years.
Yeah, next 50 years.
But nothing to do with ozone or
nothing at all.
Earth's atmosphere or anything else.
Are you telling me that hole in the ozone layer just magically repaired itself in 20 years? It doesn't work that way.
NASA put one of their stickers on it and it went away.
Yes.
That's about it.
Yeah.
So that hole in the ozone layer always repairs itself. Yeah. It's a natural process.
Absolutely.
But they didn't tell us that, did they? They told us it was dangerous and hairspray was to be outlawed. Car air conditioning was to be stopped.
They not only needed to continue their patent, so they changed the formula of the refrigerant, got the government to back it up to ban their other ones so nobody else could use it. That's the biggest thing they needed to do, is get the government to say, you can't use the old product that everybody could manufacture, that was very easy to manufacture.
Yeah, very easy.
And then they got the market tied up again with their new patent, with their R34 on there, and charged twice as much money for it.
Yeah, and it does just as much damage, and it has no effect on the ozone layer at all. Somebody's making a lot of money out of this hole in the ozone layer story.
People like to double down and say, yeah, well, I'm part of a cult too, and stuff like that, right? And one guy said, you guys are just nuts, I'm out of here. And so I took the lyrics from the Carpenters, calling interplanetary space.
Yeah, that's good.
Telepathy. And I put that in the thing and I went, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, that's the best way to do it, really. I mean, so what? If people don't like what we're doing, they don't have to watch it.
Well, they just come on there. They think they're going to show us how it's done and how wrong we are. And of course, that guy was on about communications. And of course, we've covered the plasma field. We've covered the radioactive spectrum and everything else in other videos, which they don't look at. And of course, even the Van Allen probes had to be in an elliptical orbit so they could communicate the information back. So they had to be under 400 miles to be able to do that. It's because that area of the space above 400 miles is seriously a problem for communication. Like I put a link to the Tersat one, which is from 500 to 800 miles that they're trying to communicate with a full gamut of radio signals. People don't read that. One guy said, well, that's all just about re-entry. Well, none of that document has anything to do with re-entry. It has to do with communicating between 500 and 800 miles. And of course, it was never launched. So there's no data coming back on that. And then when you go to Orion, when they launched it, all the TV cameras were dead by 500 miles.
So you got CGI.
And when you look at even what Musk put up, even when he put his car up, how long did his camera last? It was gone at 500 miles. Is that because it's knocked out because of the radiation at that level? Or is it because they can't communicate past that level?
Well, I'm sure somebody will come up and tell us what the answer is, because they're all knowledgeable about these things.
Oh, absolutely.
Come on, guys, get typing. Tell us how wrong we are. Tell us how right you are. Give us the references. Tell us what we should be looking at.
Yeah, get on Chat GPT and get an answer from there. Write Sonic, they can come up with stuff. The fact that we called them out as a cult, which it actually is, it's like any other religious cult kind of thing, right? It's just unbelievable. And if I do recall, I mentioned that back on some of my first interviews with Todd Bates, that it's more like a religion.
I mentioned Jack Parsons and Theodore Carmen and Frank Molina. Now, how many people know that Frank Molina, who was one of the founders of JPL, one of the forerunners of NASA, moved to Paris because he was being so attacked for his political beliefs and was refused a passport by the State Department. So he spent his rest of his life or near Paris. That's the sort of treatment that somebody who'd created a great deal of the forerunners to rocket launches, to NASA, was treated by. It's all to do with the McCarthy era hearings in the early 1950s. There's terrible things went on then. People were seriously affected by it.
Yes, that was a rather vicious time frame in the 50s there. Like, they were going after movie actors, they were going after everybody for their associations. And when you look at how humans respond and how easily you can convince them at a negative level, and fear is one of our most basic functions that we have as a human. And if you don't understand it, you fear it. So you have two choices. You either attack it or you run away.
I mean, we're seeing it consistently on the films that we post, or films that Robert posts. We see it in the responses. And people just can't give up on it. They keep coming back to it. I mean, we've been doing this for 2 or 3 years now. You'd think by now that they'd know where we were coming from and provide the evidence, not the comments, not the ridiculous personal attacks that we get quite often, which doesn't bother me at all, really. But we get those personal attacks because that's all people can do. And if they revert to personal attacks, we know they've lost the argument because they can't come up with anything better.
Well, the other thing is people don't like to realize that they're completely wrong. Everybody believes that they're a lot smarter than they think they are. And when you have a national program that is putting out propaganda continuously, and they're fed into it, they're born and raised with it in this particular case, and to show that it's just been one big fraud from start to finish, and a heavily funded fraud.
Oh, there's a lot of money involved. That's why there's so many people involved.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it. They probably weren't aware of what was going on.
We also want to believe that we can do anything we put our minds to, that there are no limits. And we're taught that from grade school on up. Of course, humans have the most incredible imagination going. And that's why I put that little insert in on the comments from Karen Carpenter, calling occupants of interplanetary space by telepathy. And of course, telepathy would work because radio signals don't.
The radio signals obey the laws of physics, not the laws of imagination.
It really is something when they continue on at such a level of impossibility. Like Robert and I were looking at the Voyager 1 and 2 signals on there, and he was just picked up a few things that they lost the signal, and then the spacecraft reconfigured the antenna. How's this thing managing to connect an antenna back to direct it in such a way at that distance that it can now communicate back with Earth? It has to do it totally autonomously. And like we've always said, well, like if the antenna's out on your satellite television set, you got to call the guy. But this machine can do it at that distance. And then, all of a sudden they're communicating against. And I mean, at that distance, the delay is over 20 hours. if people believe that, like if they can put that out and have you believe that this thing is still functioning, and of course it's going to be in a torr value of 10 to the minus 17th or more calculated for deep space. The temperature is approaching absolute zero.
Minus 273 degrees centigrade.
So it's down into that range. And they believe because they got a nuclear power pack on there, which is a thermal thing, at that temperature it's not going to function. And the battery it's supposed to be charging up would be frozen in. There'd be very little molecular movement going on in that whatsoever. But this thing somehow in the 1970s was fully autonomous to be able to reconfigure, and it would have to know exactly where it was in space to be able to direct the antenna back and connect with the signal back to Earth. Absolutely fantasy.